Rise to the top with Valor Energy and their new partnership with the Professional Fighters League. Fueling champions inside and outside the smart cage. Valor's nitrogen-infused orange cream and blueberry tart delivers a smooth, creamy flavour with 175 mg of natural caffeine to fuel your day. Ready to rise to the top? Grab your Valor Energy drink today. Available on Amazon. All right, everybody. Another episode of the Sheehan Show here. Delighted to be joined today by Ian O'Neill as we talk a little bit about the middleweight. So just a couple of hours ago or a couple of days ago, or depending on when you're listening to this podcast, we had Israel Adesanya against Nasruddin Imavov, and in a couple of hours or a couple of days, depending on when you're listening to this podcast, we have the middleweight title fight going on. And I saw my good friend and our good friend Spencer Kai put up an article about, I think there's like 8 ranked middleweights fighting in the next 3 weeks or something like that. So it's a very interesting time for the middleweights, and a time, I suppose, to jump on here and have a chat about them. So I've got Ian in with me today to talk about that. Ian, if you were to, and I know we've done our over in Severe before, our state of the UFC. If you were to talk about the state of the middleweight division right now, where would you put it? Do you think it's in a good place, a bad place? Like, obviously, we're a week before a title fight and a week after the ex-champion, or a few days after the ex-champion, just after losing. Good place, bad place, indifferent. What do you think?
I think we're in a good place in terms of we're kind of getting a fresh start at the top of the division. Obviously, with Dricus du Plessis, obviously he's going in and he's going to be defending his title again this coming weekend. But you know, the loss of Israel Adesanya last weekend kind of opens up some space for some fresh blood up at the top of the division, and I don't necessarily think that that's a bad thing. Now, I wouldn't count Israel Adesanya completely out at this stage of his career, but it's going to be very hard for him to get back up into maybe title contention. He's going to need 1, if not 2, maybe 3 wins to kind of get back up there. But you know, as we're looking down through it, we have Carvalho, we have Imamov, who obviously got the win over Israel, coming through. Fluffy Hernandez outside the top 10, and obviously, you know, a big guy that's outside the rankings right now that I expect to come into the rankings this year would be Bo Nickel. So, I mean, you know, we're getting, you know, we always said about the middleweight division where sometimes it's struggled to have contenders. And it seems that the middleweight division inside the UFC right now is picking up a little bit of momentum in terms of fresh matchups, because I think fresh matchups are key to a division moving and to keeping a division exciting, especially in the UFC.
That's a very, very interesting point, because it's funny that we had the Adesanya era, which went probably quicker than most people would realize, because Adesanya fought so many times. So like Adesanya's early fights in the UFC were in 2018, you know, where he had that unbelievable breakthrough year. Like the Gastelum fight was 2019. The Whitaker fight was the end of 2019. You know, so that's, okay, we're 2005 now, but like that's a 5-year era basically. But having said that, you know, he lost the first fight to Pereira 2022, won in 2023, lost it to Strickland in 2023 as well in September. So because Adesanya fought so many times, you know, in the middle of all that, we'd Cannonier, we'd Whitaker, again, we'd Vittori, obviously went up to light heavyweight, we'd Costa, Romero, Whitaker, you know, again, to start it off. It was so jam-packed that it felt like, and maybe I'm wrong here, I wouldn't mind getting your opinion on this, but it felt like an Anderson Silva type era, a Demetrius Johnson type era, a John Jones type era. And he won enough fights for it to be, you know, maybe not those type eras, but maybe a Tyron Woodley era or something like that, where he had the belt for a while. And I think what we actually have now is one of the post-era shake-ups. You know, when GSP went away, we had Robbie Lawler, we had Johnny Hendricks, we had Tyron Woodley, and we had all of that. You know, when John Jones went away, we had, you know, obviously we have Pereira now, but we had, who do we have? Blachowicz, and we had a few, Yuri Prochazka, and we had Jamal Hill, and, you know, this happens, and in the middleweight division even before, we had Bisping and Rockhold and Weidman, you know, who kind of shared it between them for a while. And I feel like at middleweight at the moment, to your point, that so many new guys have come through over the last while, and we haven't even mentioned the two guys fighting in the main event yet, only in passing maybe, that it's a really good time for this to be a post-era shake-up time, I think. And for a long time, we've criticized the middleweight division. I don't think the very top of that division was filled with quality for a while, and it felt like Adesanya maybe suffered because of that. Because we could talk about Adesanya in a while maybe, but when he was at his best, it felt almost like that he knew he was so much better than a lot of those guys, and that almost didn't help him. He never had, until Pereira came around, he never had his guy that he went up against, and then that ended very, very quickly as well. But for what we have right now, Ian, are you looking at this as an era where someone could win the belt and then lose it and win it and lose it? And that's kind of already happened, I suppose, and kind of already started with the two lads that are there right now.
I think the fight this coming weekend is going to tell us that, will Dricus be able to kind of retain this title again that he won off Sean Strickland? If he doesn't, I can very well see it being a kind of another merry-go-round. What we have right now in the middleweight division that we haven't had in the last number of years, I feel is a more well-rounded level of athlete. Israel Adesanya, obviously very good at what he did and a very worthy champion, but, he was in a time where he fought majority striking-based fighters, that suited his style. Now we're seeing the likes of Dricus come here and kind of mix it up, very well-rounded. The same with Imamov as well, has that wrestling. We see Carvalho, like I mentioned already, Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu black belt, very good on the feet as well. Bo Nickel, obviously, with his wrestling credentials. So you have a lot more as a champion to kind of prepare for. And obviously, Israel Adesanya as a champion would have been prepared for everybody to want to take him down. But I feel, obviously a guy you haven't mentioned at all is Khamzat Chimaev, who is the ultimate grappler here and could be the next champion in many people's eyes in this division. So I feel that, we have been critical about the middleweight division in the past, but with all due respect to it, in the past, it was maybe so bad that it could only get better. And, every division goes through this. I would argue that the light heavyweight division is going through this problem right now in the UFC in terms of lack of challengers, lack of fresh, new up-and-coming talent. And it's getting, we have the big fight between Alex Pereira and Ankalaev, which is a fantastic fight. But, what's after that? What do we have after that? Here we have, the fight coming up this weekend. We have a bunch of potential matchups that we could make in the middleweight division as well. And that will breed a new air of life into the 180-pound division, in my opinion. And I'm looking forward to it. It's going to be a big year for the division, I feel.
Yeah, 100%. So let's get into that and let's talk about it. And I suppose before we get into the future and the title fight coming up, let's talk a little bit more about Adesanya and I suppose where he lies at the moment, because I was talking last week and we were both talking, I think, about like how this was such a big fight at a pivotal time for Adesanya's career, because he loses this, and I'm just looking at his record here. He has obviously lost 3 in a row now, but 4 of his last 5 as well, only beaten Alex Pereira since July of 2022. When you look at it at middleweight, right, so the 2 guys coming up next week, he's lost to both of them. Chimaev is coming next. We kind of know that. We'll speak about Chimaev in a minute. And even, like, let's say if Chimaev was to win and go through a Dricus or a Strickland, maybe you could say Izzy's next after that. But now the fact that he's lost to Imavov means he's even further back in that list. He's not just behind Chimaev, he's behind another guy now as well. And, you mentioned the likes of Carvalho and maybe others coming as well, which could be a big, big issue for Israel Adesanya. Now, we could talk about that and the rankings until the cows come on. But the point I want to make is that good for the UFC, right? Because I've been very, very critical of the UFC having that Pereira Adesanya trilogy fight and not making it. And I was kind of thinking, like, maybe if he bet Imavov, I'm watching too much hurling today. If he beat Imavov, that maybe even he could have gone up to light heavyweight. And you just mentioned there who's next after Ankalaev. Maybe it could have been Izzy. And maybe that's what Izzy does. Maybe that's a chat for another day. But the fact that that trilogy hasn't already been made, it was going to take something outrageous for it to happen again. And like a lot of people would have argued, Pereira becoming the champion away it up would have been the outrageous thing. But what's even more outrageous is that happening, plus Izzy getting back or staying the champion, and them making the fight. And look, now at this stage, it looks like that fight is the furthest thing away. So not only did they miss out on that fight, but I also think they missed out on Izzy becoming a real star. Because, we talked about it many, many times. There was that Cannonier fight was a big issue for Izzy when he was I think he's been on the verge of stardom a few times. And then, we get the Romero fights, which are duds, and we get the Cannonier fight, which is a dud, and then he loses. And then the Pereira fight comes and okay, let's do this trilogy and he can become a star again. And like, not to say Adesanya isn't a star, but he's not your blow-away John Jones McGregor, type of star, which I think he was on the verge of becoming. So with that said, and the point I'm kind of making here is like the UFC's middleweight division, I think, is kind of lost that. We had Anderson Silva, who you could say was Anderson did go over that threshold, I think, at one stage, but not for very long. Izzy was almost at the threshold, but never went over it. And I don't know if any of these up-and-coming lads can. Just on that point forward, before we go to the next type of lads coming, the Adesanya era, is there a fear that we overrated it, Tad? Or am I being too harsh on it? Do you think it reached the heights that it should have reached? Let's put it that way.
It's a hard one to say. Like, I mean, if we're going to go out and criticize the level of competition in the middleweight division during the Adesanya era, and it being not very talent-rich division, I feel it'd be unfair for us to say that it was a good era for him or he did over. I think the proof is in the pudding. Alex Pereira was brought into the UFC to propel Israel Adesanya's stardom, and right now, as we speak, Alex Pereira is a bigger star than Israel Adesanya, and I think that speaks volumes. I'm a fan of a fighter who takes chances, and I believe to get to that next level, to become a star, you have to take chances. And I think all the stars of the past have taken chances, whether it be chances in level of opponent, whether it be taking those chances in fights to deliver a kind of a viral knockout. There has been some many viral moments for Israel Adesanya, but I value what he did in terms of activity. There's not too many champions who are as active as Israel Adesanya when he was the champion, and we have to give him credit. And we know from previous champions and what they've said, Shawnee, it's not an easy thing to do. When you've got the target on your back, and it catches up with everybody. And maybe the results of those activity are what we're seeing right now with Israel Adesanya, a guy that maybe is a little bit battle-worn, maybe he's not able to take the shots that he used to be able to take, maybe isn't as quick and as agile as he once was before. So, that kind of level of activity does come with a lot of consequence as well. So, to answer your question, I think we can value his reign in some ways, and then also acknowledge that, it came at a time where the middleweight division maybe wasn't at its best.
Yeah, and I was kind of making that point coming into the Amava fight last week, that he was like, he's a very, very good fighter, but maybe people thought it was a little bit better. But, now maybe there's a tendency to underrate him a little bit because of what's happened over the last few fights. Now the Amava fight, I think maybe we can throw that into the outlier range, but that's again a discussion I suppose for another day. I don't think anyone is looking at Adesanya making a comeback to the top of the division anytime soon. But as I said, that's maybe a chat for another day. Let's talk about the next guys coming through, and first of all, we'll talk about Chimaev in a second. But for Duplessis and Strickland and their maybe stardom or superstardom potential, it's based on what you said about Alex Pereira, it's actually hard to know what actually makes a star these days. Now Pereira, I suppose looking back at it, it's obvious he's this stone-faced killer who knocks guys out with one punch. How could he not become a star? But some lads are kind of made stars because they're because of their style, because of the way they fight. Some because they're a bit goofy and they get to a place where maybe they shouldn't get to, and you'd never know. And I would put, Strickland and Duplessis are different, I think. Strickland is one of these guys where some people love him because of all the stuff he says and all of that. Some people hate him because of all the stuff he says. Some people think maybe he's a bit of a rogue and like they hate to love him type of thing, right? And then his style, again, it's not the best style in the world, but it's a style that works for him, and you have to appreciate that. So it can go either way. And then Drick is the other side of it. Then I think he's one of these lads that a lot of people realize, looking into Drick, is what he has done in his career. Going the KSW route, having lots of tough fights, really earning his way to the UFC. And, could there be a touch of like the Dustin Poirier love? Could he get that over the next couple of years? I think there is a possibility of that happening with Drick. He had kind of that weird back and forth in the Africa thing with Adesanya, which was not nice, was really, really not nice. But I think he came out of that, and I think, I think they maybe squashed the beef. And after that, he's not completely outside from that, but he's made like some jokes, and you could see Drick's being lovable.
Yeah, I think during that kind of clash between him and Izzy, I think Izzy was the main driver of that of beef too, and I think that kind of helps Drick, especially when you go out and you beat him afterwards. And I think, for Drickus, the most important thing for me is results right now, is getting these results. And I think he's got the charisma on the microphone when it doesn't turn dark. I think he's got the looks. He's a big, burly guy. He looks strong, good-looking man, very marketable. All of those things are important in becoming a star, whether you want to think. Obviously, you could, like I said, what happens inside the cage, I feel, is the most important, but you can build up everything around it. And I feel Drickus du Plessis is very underrated as a fighter for what he does. Like, he doesn't do anything tremendously well, but is very, very effective and very difficult to beat. And I feel that, this has a potential. Like, I feel this win here is going to kickstart, if he does go out there and get it over Sean Strickland, will kickstart an absolutely massive year where he's going to have to face all of these new challengers, and we'll then find out that level of champion. We could very well be in the Drickus du Plessis era right now.
We could, because you said, it's funny, but like, if we said that a couple of fights ago, a lot of people would be like, he probably won't even win the title. But then you look at his record right now, right? And these are his last few wins: Brad Tavares, Darren Till, Derek Brunson, Robert Whittaker, Sean Strickland, Adesanya, and like, let's say we add in Strickland again this weekend. Suddenly, that's not looking like a contender. That's looking like a championship CV right there. And I think your point is very, very well made. But the other point that you made is very well made as well, that he needs to win, and putting results together is all about it. Because a guy like him, once he does start, unless he becomes, your Poirier type, and until he becomes that, the results really, really matter. Because we know what happens with MMA fans and with people following any sports. You start to win, and suddenly people are like, "Oh yeah, he is good. Oh yeah, I knew he was good. I always know he's good. Of course he's going to beat the next guy." Like, no matter who is the champion, there will be people out there saying, "Oh no, he's definitely going to beat the next guy." And whether that's true or not, to have people talk about you in that way is a real positive, because the vast majority, there's only 11 fighters or whatever that in the UFC that actually have that. And the guy you mentioned, Bo Nickel, is maybe one that has it, and then a couple of others as well, like a Habib or an Islam on the way through sometimes have it as well. But for du Plessis to have that, I think it'll be absolutely massive. On the other side of that, Dinian, what do you think about for Strickland this weekend? Like, looking at his record here, obviously he bounced back from the du Plessis loss to beat Paulo Costa, and before that he'd beaten Izzy, Abbas Magomedov, and Imavov, who, that win is looking better and better and better now all the time. Funnily enough, he lost to Cannonier and Bahia before that, but a win and a loss here, Ian. What does it mean for Strickland? What do you think? How big is this weekend for him?
This weekend is absolutely huge for Strickland, because I feel this is the last dance for him in terms of, if he loses this fight, will the UFC give him another opportunity? I'm not sure, based off what we've been talking about over the last 20 minutes or so, that he has the skill set to kind of become a champion and remain a champion. Now, obviously, the last fight between him and Dricus was very close, but I expect Dricus to come in here leveled up with a higher level of confidence, with a couple of tricks up his sleeve to kind of combat. I mean, look at Sean. When you're talking about Sean Strickland, you know what you're going to have to deal with. You're going to have to deal with that forward pressure and the boxing. You know what I mean? You know you're not going to have to deal with anything else. And sooner rather than later, he's going to get found out, and he has got found out. So one might argue, that he caught Israel right at a time when he was about to slip. When he did, it was a tremendous performance, and he deserved to win that fight. But, I felt Dricus did enough to win that fight the first time around, and I think he... if I was to give a prediction, I honestly feel he might go out there and win it easier this time as well. I'm not too confident that Sean Strickland is going to be able to go out there and get it done, for the sole reason is I just think he's a little bit too one-dimensional. Now, anything is, he surprised us before in the past, and he might do that again. So what does a win do for him? I mean, the win sets him up to be in a position to do exactly what we were talking about with Dricus du Plessis, become a 2-time middleweight champion. It's not easy to return back up to the top and take that title again. Israel was trying to do it this past weekend for the 3rd time, which would have been monumental if he had done it. But I feel for Sean Strickland, this is, the last dance for him, really. I think this is, if he doesn't get it done on Saturday night, I can't see him being thrust into position where he's going to get an opportunity to fight for a title again. I think he knows that. I hope he's training like that. I'd assume he is. And, if he is, I feel it's going to make it a really good fight. But I just think Dricus, he kind of has his numbers in ways. I think he's able for the pressure. He can take those shots. He has that grappling in his back pocket as well. And if he mixes up that grappling this weekend, I think that he can cause Sean Strickland some level of trouble too. So, big fight for Sean Strickland this weekend.
It's a massive fight, and I have a little bit of insight in what you were saying there about Strickland, because I spoke to Eric Nixick the other day, and I'm not sure if the interview will be out yet or not, but around this time anyway. And I was actually kind of surprised he said it, because like he said, basically, look, Dricus outfought us in the first fight, and like outdogged us, I think was maybe the phrase he used. Which is very unusual for Sean Strickland. Very, very unusual. And, what I really liked about that is that's, if he said it to me, he's obviously saying that, and that's obviously a talking point in camp with Sean Strickland. And I can't imagine a guy like Sean Strickland would like to think about himself being outdogged by anyone. So coming into this next fight, right, that alone makes me so excited for it, because, I watched back this, and I recorded the rewatch over at Severe May, for this will be out on Friday. And I did it a couple of hours before I interviewed Eric Nixick, and I thought exactly what you thought there, that maybe Dricus might actually be the one that could adjust a little bit more and maybe win it more clearly. I was looking back, I actually scored the first fight for Sean Strickland, but it was very, very close. It could have gone either way. But Dricus got some good takedowns in that, and he made some nice adjustments in round 3, 4, and 5 with the striking as well, to think that he found ways. But Strickland also found ways, and Eric Nixick said that to me, like what he did at the end of that fight, the way he put it on Dricus. Sean Strickland can do that for 5 rounds. Merab might be the only other one in the world, maybe, and maybe Dricus as well, actually, but there's very few people who can actually fight that pace for 5 rounds. And I'll tell you what, if that fight turns into this, where both of them are going at it, both of them are laying it out there for 5 rounds, this could be a really good fight. And it's weird, because like sometimes you get an Adesanya, and then there's maybe a guy who isn't as detail oriented or as technical as him, and it takes a lot for that guy to turn it into a great fight against Adesanya. But when there's 2 guys who maybe aren't as technical in different sort of ways. I know Strickland kind of fights technical in his own way, but if he's going at it with du Plessis, that could be unbelievable. So we'll see that. And but this is not a preview show, but we'll throw that preview out there. Ian, before we go, we have to talk about Chimaev, because he is the boogeyman. He's the shadow sitting down over all of this. And here's a question. Maybe this is a tough question. Maybe it's an easy question. Doesn't matter who wins next Saturday. Doesn't matter. Like, is Chimaev going to go in there and beat either one of them?
I think it does matter. Their styles make fights, and I would be more confident in Chimaev going in there and getting a result over someone like Sean Strickland at this stage more than I would against Dricus du Plessis. I've had such a weird kind of relationship with Chimaev where I've thought he was the bee's knees. I thought he was the best, and then you have a level of doubt there. When he fought Usman and he struggled there, and obviously he was coming off a lot of health issues and everything like that. Then he comes out against Robert Whittaker and breaks his jaw basically with a rear naked choke and the squeeze that he has. But we only got to see him fighting in the first round. And I think the big questions around Khamzat Chimaev is, how does he do rounds 3, rounds 4, rounds 5? What does he do when things don't go his way? We've seen him, and we have seen him be a very good hammer, but when the hammer is not working and when you're missing that nail, you have to become the nail yourself sometimes. And I thought he struggled with that a little bit in the Kamaru Usman fight. And I feel that, that will give the likes of Dricus du Plessis levels of confidence where, you might have to succumb to a couple of takedowns early in a fight with Khamzat Chimaev. But, if you can survive on the mat and you can bring him into the later rounds, that's where I feel you can have the most success with a guy like Khamzat Chimaev. But, for me to say you've got to get there and actually getting there is very difficult to do because he's a buzzsaw. He goes straight in for the kill, and that's very hard to combat. And, like I said, I love guys that take risks, and Khamzat Chimaev, he takes risks. He goes for it. And, we've seen a glimpse of what happens when he goes for it and it doesn't work out. And I'm very interested to get another glimpse of that again if he does get in and get a chance at the title, one of the winners here this weekend.
Yeah, and even if we're kind of wrapping this up here, that is exciting, isn't it? Like, we're excited about the fight this weekend. I'd actually, I think there's an argument out there as well that Strickland's pace might be an interesting thing for Chimaev to deal with. I agree with you 100% on du Plessis. And, and just to add to your point as well, I think where du Plessis is in his career right now, we touched on it earlier on, that, he is so experienced, not only in the UFC, but outside of it as well. You almost need that to go at Chimaev, right? You mentioned Usman, a great example is that he did it. He had no problem. Gilbert Burns had no problem going at him. Maybe those guys weren't at the stage in their career. Maybe they were just a little bit too small to actually go at him and test him. But God Almighty, if that happens, it's massive. And you know the thing about it as well? No matter who wins next weekend, right? Let's say du Plessis wins and he fights Chimaev. Great fight where we just talked about that. Strickland might have to fight Imavov again based on what's happened. The winner of that then going in there to fight a Chimaev or a du Plessis again is also exciting because maybe we don't just get Khamzat versus du Plessis. Maybe we get Khamzat versus du Plessis and Khamzat versus Strickland and Khamzat versus Imavov and a lot of these fights, because the one thing I would say, and Dana White just said it as well after the press conference on Saturday night, he does, but obviously with Trump in office now and everything, I think that's what he's alluding to, that Chimaev might be able to fight in America now again. So you would hope that he'll be able to fight more often. He's up at middleweight. The weight cut isn't going to be as big an issue as it is for him down at 170. So all in all here, Ian, to drag it around, positive vibes only. Middleweight 2025. It's got to be good, isn't it? It's got to be good.
It's going to be really good. And may I throw one last curveball at you before we finish as well? What about MVP? I mean, he fought at 185. He got the win against Shara Bullet. I mean, Shara Bullet ranked number 14 in the UFC rankings right now. He talked about wanting to go back down to 170, but I think that there's more of a chance of him coming up the middleweight division here and causing a few issues. What do you think?
I think you're right. What you said earlier on about Adesanya as well, like being a very strike-oriented division. Now it's kind of changed a little bit, as you were talking about a few years ago, but still in all, like... what
about Izzy versus MVP? That's the fight. We got a chance now.
But am I getting it wrong? Did MVP say he wanted to fight Shara because Shara took shots at Izzy? Are they friends or something? Is there something there? I don't know. Do you know what fight I'd like to see? Now, I've never thought about this before. MVP versus Strickland. How would that go down? That's an interesting fight there. But there's a lot. But I love Carvalho. I really like Carvalho. I think he's number 6, right behind Imavov. There's some, and you mentioned Fluffy at the start. I love a bit of Fluffy as well. He just beat Pereira not too long ago. There's a lot of good guys coming here.
with the rumors going around about one championship and fighters leaving too, maybe we'll see a Roberto Soldic entered into the middleweight division in 2025, and that would definitely add a sprinkle of excitement to that division.
It definitely would. So yeah, lots there to look forward to, lads. Thank you very much for tuning in. Just before we go, shout out again to our friends over at Valor Energy. Rise to the top at Valor Energy in their new partnership with the Professional Fighters League, fueling champions inside and outside the smart cage. Valor's nitrogen-infused orange cream and blueberry tart delivers a smooth, creamy flavour, 175 mg of natural caffeine to fuel your day. Ready to rise to the top? Grab your Valor Energy drink today, available on Amazon. Thank you very much to everybody for tuning in. Ian O'Neill, thank you very much for joining me. Follow him at O'Neill MMA over on Twitter. Check out his podcast every second Wednesday, The Owl Triangle, over on Severe MMA, and all the other great stuff he does over there. Thank you very much, everyone, for tuning in. My name is Sheehan for Sherdog.com, and we'll see you all next time.